It's a delight to start our fourth seminar on governance. And this one is on a topic that came up as being one of interest when we were running the first three webinars. So the topic for this particular one is the significant relationship between the principal or head of a school and the CEO of either the Multi-Academy Trust or the head teacher who is running the school. So between the head and essentially the chair of governors, to put it simply, and how important that relationship is. And our two speakers are both very experienced in that relationship and guiding it. David Gracie, who is on the trust board of a MAT, a primary and secondary MAT, and Arabella Gonzalez, who is business manager for the Haberdasher schools. And Arabella has a wonderful video to show us just to begin with, in order for us to see the principal of a school and the chair of a trust board talking about what that relationship should be. And Arabella has her screen just about ready to play. So over to you, Arabella.
I'm chair of our trust board, and that means I have a non-executive role and I lead a team of volunteers. Our job is to be strategic rather than operational, and to be a critical friend and sounding board for the senior executive leaders such as yourself.
I'm the Chief Executive of Haberdashers Academies Trust South. I think it's a huge opportunity to be involved in education, to be an education leader and to influence the lives of young children and young people for the better and for the future. An opportunity to do that in the vibrancy of London and everything that presents. We've got so much on your doorstep to make use of. An opportunity to work from 3 to forever, all the way through, and see young people grow and develop. And obviously the opportunity to be part of the Haberdashers company and the uniqueness that brings.
So I went to Crowfoot Academy from year 7 to year 12, and I got to speak with Jan. And she said, you know what, Jordan, I think you should get into governorship. I think you should go to Borough Academy, a new setup, a new school, and be one of the governors there. They were looking to recruit young talent, diverse talent. So I thought to myself, why not get into governorship and kind of like reshape and help Borough Academy in their transition to building a new sixth form. So I was sold by the vision by Jan, and I said, sign me up. And here I am. It's been about nearly 2 years and I'm loving it.
These days, we've got a very clearly articulated purpose, which is to empower young people from every background to fulfil their potential.
Exactly.
So the Haberdashers Advantage programme for our trust is really our character education programme. We have every school contributing to that. Trips, events, visits. It's the experience of our children within a haberdasher school connected to the company. Our vision is every school an excellent school, and we're striving for all of our children to have excellent outcomes.
And as of this year, all of our schools are currently rated by Ofsted either good or outstanding.
So thank you, Arabella, for that. That is the introduction to our topic. And I've mentioned only very briefly the names of Arabella Gonzalez and David Gracie. And I think rather than my introducing them, perhaps I should ask them to introduce themselves in more detail and probably with more accuracy. So David, I know you're online. Could you please introduce yourself now?
Thank you, Anne, and good evening, everyone. Good to be here and to talk about this topic. It's one which I feel very passionate about. So my day job is I'm director of Indigo Independent Governance. We provide a range of governance and COSEC services to companies across all sectors, and therefore we get to see all governance arrangements. And actually one of the things I find most fascinating about things as there might be things that we can learn from the education sector and vice versa in about how to apply good governance. I've also recently been elected to the court of the livery company as well. My role at Mulberry Schools Trust. So I'm a trustee. I've been a trustee there since 2017. I chair the finance committee, and I'm chair of what we haven't got a name for it. I'll call it the newly formed governance committee, but I'll come on to that a bit later. And I was also chair of governors at Mulberry Academy Shoreditch between 2017 and 2024. My relationship with Mulberry Academy Shoreditch actually occurred because of the livery company, and they had established a relationship with what was Bethnal Green Academy at the time, and I took my team from KPMG to deliver some employability workshops to them. And once I was through that door, they roped me in, and I've not been able to get out since. Thankfully. Mulberry is a growing multi-academy trust. We are now up to 8 schools in total, including Mulberry London Dock, which was officially opened by Her Majesty Queen Camilla last week. And Mulberry's vision is to be a key provider for quality education so that all students leave as highly qualified, confident and articulate young people with a wealth of experience. And an extensive effort is made on extracurricular activities, and they really do try to provide a fantastic experience to all students. And I'd just like to finish my intro by just saying that the livery company has also been incredibly supportive, and the charitable trust has made a number of donations to help fund the music department, as well as giving up lots of time. So the likes of Ted Nichols and Angela Squire have supported that school with the Sheriff's Challenge as well. So delighted to be here to join Arabella, and really looking forward to hearing about the experience that Arabella has had at the Haberdashers as well.
Thank you so much, David. And David will be, during the course of this hour, having a dialogue with Arabella, who, can I now invite you, Arabella, to introduce yourself, and after that to move into the slides, which I know where you and David will be having this professional conversation about the topics as you work through them.
Thank you, Anne. Yes, my name's Arabella Gonzalez. I'm currently Director for Schools for the Haberdashers Livery Company. My previous background is as a bursar and clerk to the governors, so I come to this from inside, and now working across a number of different schools. I'm going to share my slides. Just pause with me for a moment while I do that.
Yes, we can see them perfectly. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll just move you. Great. So I'm going to talk, obviously the topic of today's webinar is the relationship between the CEO and the head and the chair of governors. I'm going to give you a little bit of background context to the Haberdashers Livery Company, because I think that's important in terms of understanding how we approach governorship and the things that we consider that are important. So just to give you a little bit of background on that. Sorry, I'm going to have to move it. I've got various different things on the screen. Great. The purpose of the Haberdashers Company is to empower young people from every background to fulfil their potential. The company has a long history with education governance, right back to the 17th century when the first schools were founded. And I emphasise that point because I think the longevity and the stability of this relationship with a livery company can give to schools is really valuable, especially in an era of very rapid swings in policy and education policy. So that's one of the themes that I should be coming back to. There are 4 groups of schools connected with the Haberdashers Livery Company, all related to an ancient charitable foundation, but now 2 MATs, small to medium-sized MATs, one in the West Midlands and one in South East London, and 2 independent schools. The MATs many of the schools draw pupils from areas of real high relative social deprivation. There are 15 schools in total. We talk about them as cousin schools, 12,000 pupils. And across those schools, the link with the company is based on those ancient charitable endowments. It's also based on governorship. So the relationship with governors is very strong, and is intended to make sure that haberdasher character and ethos is maintained in all the schools. 50% of the governors, on average, are drawn from haberdasher membership. And we also like to talk about a virtuous circle where successful governors who come from outside the company are asked to join the company, and we have executive leaders from one school representing on other different governing bodies. So we like to keep a whole connection and a feeling of community. It's overseen by the Education Committee, which is a company committee which includes the chairs of governors of all 4 groups of schools, and specifically a governance review committee, which is a subcommittee which concentrates on the flow of governors into the schools. We also work with our schools through a programme that we call the Haberdashers Advantage, and I'm just going to share a few images of what that looks like for you. 2 direct to pupils programmes, Futures and Character, and a professional collaboration programme called Working Together. The key thing that I want you to take from the next few slides is community, the feeling of there being one Haberdashers family. So this is our Futures programme, careers and employability focused. What I'd like to emphasise here is that the highlighted parts of the quotes, the helpful nature of everyone in the community, and the fact that questions are so genuinely encouraged. We're aiming to bring students and young people in contact with our members who work in different professions. We have flagship careers events, we have networking lunches. And then our character programme, which is focused on leadership, soft skills, cultural capital. And there, again, we like to feel that the students feel very welcomed into the hall. It's all one community where we bring them together. And perhaps the most attractive photograph that I can share with you on that is the previous slide was our year 12 pupils at their annual leadership event for head boys and head girls and prefects. This is our junior version of the same event, where we have the junior school pupil leaders all coming in to learn leadership skills and about their new jobs. Very similar to the older students event, more dressing up for the year 6s, as you can see, dressed up as master and wardens at the front. The emphasis is one community. We pride ourselves on bringing together all of our students from very, very different backgrounds and making them feel that they belong to one community. And then our Working Together programme, which is based on professional collaboration. The image in the slide here is of our annual education symposium, where we bring together senior executive leaders and governors from all of our trusts to work together on high-level strategic issues. So what we're aiming for here is a high challenge, low threat environment, and bringing schools together in an inclusive way to talk about subjects of common interest. All the photographs in the rest of my presentation are drawn from this event. So this is the first of the slides which are focused on what we believe governors need to have and chairs of governors. So focusing on skills and experience, character, and crucially, time availability. The important point to realise is that MAT trustees, independent school governors, whichever they are basically directors who are running a charitable company with responsibility for financial management, staffing, strategic oversight. LGBs and local advisory boards don't share these legal responsibilities, but their role is more focused on intimate knowledge of a school and its community. What's interesting, as independent school groups grow, it's likely that we're going to see a development of the trust board LGB structure for larger independent school groups. The role of the Governance Review Committee in Haberdashers is to help with the succession planning for the leaders of these board of directors, the chairs of governors. And as part of that process, we emphasise skill set and ability to think strategically and take the long view with setting strategic priorities. Strong written and oral communications. They have to be good at chairing meetings. They have to be good at encouraging debate and getting the most out of members of the board. And they need senior leadership experience, preferably running a business. That's our preference. People who've been accustomed to the complexities of running a business. In terms of character, we emphasise the Nolan principles that I'm sure many of you are already familiar with. Selflessness, integrity, objectivity, accountability, openness, honesty, and leadership. We emphasise EDI. We emphasise very strongly respect for educational professionals. We don't want these people to be highly authoritative. We want them to be curious to learn and to listen and open to constructive dissent. And critically, they have to have plenty of time available. We believe that it needs a day-a-week commitment to be chair of a large board, and to be a regular presence in the school to build the kind of credibility that goes with that. I'm going to pause there and let David make his comments so that we can discuss further.
Thank you, Arabella. I mean, I'd agree with all of what you just said there around skills, experience, and character, and so on. I mean, interestingly, I think one of the things that people seem to value the most is making sure that all the meetings finish on time, which is definitely a strong strength for that one. I think focusing on the strategy and leadership, having that ability to step back, try not to get too stuck into the weeds, to sort of make sure that you keep focusing on that longer term vision is really important, and then ensuring that you get the right reporting on a regular basis to be able to properly measure and identify trends. But I think the bit I'd probably focus on, I was talking to the head I've worked with more often than not over the years, is it's about relationships. That is the biggest thing to focus on, I think. And there are many different stakeholders, whether it's the head teacher, the senior leadership team, teachers, students, parents, other governors, trust members. So you've got to make sure you're really well connected with all these different groups and understand all the different viewpoints of each of them, so you can make sure you're having proper discussions at the meetings itself. I think with the head teacher as well, one of the things that we've found particularly is that the head teacher can be quite a lonely role, because they don't necessarily, if they're feeling frustrations or they're needing some support, they might not want to speak to their members of their senior leadership team. They might not want to sort of display such what might be deemed as weaknesses and so on. But equally, they might not want to have conversations like that with the CEO of the trust as well. So actually, being someone who's there to listen to some of the challenges that are taking place is crucial, and be able to show empathy to that as well. But at the same time, I think you have to recognise that relationship, you've got to be able to challenge, you've got to be able to probe, you've got to be able to understand what decisions have been taken and why. And I think it's about knowing what questions to ask and when. So I wouldn't turn up to a local governing body meeting and then start, looking to throw someone under the bus. You'd want to understand the issues ahead of time. You'd want to make sure, as I say, you're knowing the questions to ask and when. But I think that the final point I'd make here is also that every relationship with the head teacher and the chair of governors is going to be different. And it's going to be different because of the level of experience that you as a chair of governors will have, but also the experience that a head teacher will have. And dealing with an experienced head, it's going to be a very different experience from someone who's new in the role and might be there, in their first year as a head teacher, who may need some different types of support and, might need some more support in their development needs and so on.
Yes, absolutely. And I go on to talk about relationships a lot. I absolutely agree with you that it's key. I'm going to ask you a question, David. Time availability. How long do you think how much time does it take to be an effective chair of governors?
It's a very good question, and I don't record my time to it, and I'm probably quite grateful that I don't, but I know it's more than I was probably anticipating.
Yes, that's the chairs of governors always say. In fact, I
I
say a day a week. I think many chairs of governors say it takes more like 2 days a week for a complicated trust board situation.
Yeah, I think it's I think again, just any of the governors as well, there will be times where you can dip in and dip out more needed. So there'll be peak times through the year, or there'll be times of the year when there'll be more to do, and it could be just from the sort of regular governance round of meetings, whether it's the chair of whether it's chairing the governing body meetings, whether it's the finance committee, and so there's always going to be peak times probably towards the end of each term. But actually, I think for those who are involved in on the governing body, you want to be able to spend time through the course of the year in the school, understanding what's going on, learning walks, going to some of the events as well. So there's always something to get involved in.
Yes, absolutely. Good. I'll move on to my next slide. So my next slide is, what does the chair of governors need to do? So what I'm going to emphasize here is strategy, governance and relationships, which is exactly what David was talking about earlier on. But before I get into that, I want to emphasize one point which we must never lose sight of. The most important job that a chair of governors does is to recruit the CEO or the head. That's the critical piece of an action which makes all the difference. And that's something never to lose sight of, which goes back to the point about needing to have senior leadership experience and being used to making senior appointments as part of that role. So when I was talking to our heads and our chairs of governors about this topic, one of them said to me, the governor role has evolved from sherry and concerts to a strategic non-executive director. And I thought that was quite an interesting way to look at what's been going on in the field of school governance. I'm going to focus now on what they need to do in terms of strategy. So we talked about a vision for the school. They need to make sure that they communicate a clear vision for the school with alignment across executive and non-executive. And for MATS, that means across the whole network of schools. I would emphasise that the standard distinction that the board is responsible for strategy and sector risk, and the executive are responsible for carrying out the strategy and managing the school, has evolved. I think it's more fluid than that, with the development of CEOs managing large trusts and the similar process in the independent sector. The division of responsibility is now more fluid and subtle than this implies. It's not a hierarchy of power, it's a collaborative relationship. And creating strategic direction can only really happen through really effective dialogue between governors and school and trust leaders. There are, of course, some heads of schools who are just good operational managers, and they'll need more input in terms of strategy than others. But in the modern trust in independent school group context, the CEO and the central team are strategic roles, and they're likely to bridge the gap between the non-executive and lead boards to the point at which they can make strategic decisions. Some of the key principles that we think are important are long-term stewardship, longevity of perspective. I think it's really important for someone coming into being a chair of governors to realise that schools run on generational timelines. They change much more slowly than the business sector does. Responsibility to students and families can last for 20 years. It's also important to think about effective use of expertise. Members of governing bodies must bring a lot of different kinds of expertise to the table: legal, education policy, strategic leadership. And going back to something that David said, again, a flexible structure. A good board is powerful at driving change, but it'll need to evolve in terms of its structure and its composition to meet the changing needs of the organisation, dependent on ambition, competition, nature of the school, structure. When things go well, governance can step back, but it needs to be much more actively involved in periods of crisis or change. And critically, a board needs to be good at external awareness. An effective board is really aware of the context, external factors, and the wider world risk and opportunities that are out there for the school. David, your thoughts?
Well, I must have skipped the Sherry part of the role, but I suppose there are three things which I keep front of mind when I was chairing the local governing body. Pretty much on every visit I would go to, firstly would be safeguarding. That was something which I think probably with the background that we have at Mulberry Academy Shoreditch is something which everyone is absolutely focused on 100%. So I find a lot of my visits will always end up speaking with the safeguarding officer, or be understanding what incidents have been logged, what are the trends, how are we managing those situations as well, thinking about the impact on the wider community and what work needs to be done there. So safeguarding is absolutely front of mind. And then the two other aspects, one is more of a backward-looking document, and the other one is more of a forward-looking one. So we talk about the self-evaluation form, or the SEF, and then we've got the self-improvement plan, or the SIP. So the self-evaluation form is where you then assess how the school has performed against a number of areas, very similar to, it's almost like an internal Ofsted inspection. So you'd be assessing how you're performing in terms of teaching and learning, you'll be assessing how you're performing in terms of leadership, and you'll be able to sort of determine what are the areas that you now need to work on to improve, which then leads to the self-improvement plan. And those are the key areas that you then would say, well, over the next 12 months, we need to get these right. So what are the plans we're going to put in place to measure that? So if we want to improve teaching and learning, is that going to be a case of increasing the number of learning walks that are taking place, the number of one-to-ones? Is it to do with the composition of the teacher base? So have you got more newly qualified teachers and so on? But it's a way of documenting very clearly at least what your priorities are to improve as a school. But overall, from a chair's perspective, I always think you need to be Ofsted ready. And I know there's a lot of media about the role of Ofsted and so on, but I've always taken a view that actually the teachers and those in the school are living and breathing it every day. Actually, as governors or as chair of governors, if that Ofsted inspector was to arrive, are you ready for it? And we had a number of training sessions for our governors to ensure they were aware of what could come. And we were very pleased that when they did arrive, we were at least very well prepared. But I do think it's really important for the chair governors to know the details. What are the priorities, what needs improving, and how is it being measured, so you can then really monitor progress in that area.
Absolutely. So moving on to my next slide, which is on governance. So here I'm going to look at accountability, vision, governance procedures, and how the chair of governors leads and develops the board. So it's interesting to reflect on accountability. The legal accountability for trustees and directors is considerable, but this doesn't imply, as was illustrated in the video that we watched at the beginning of this session, this doesn't imply direct involvement. The governor's role is more to ensure that the right systems and processes are in place to provide reassurance that the executive are doing their jobs. While trustees have a high level of legal accountability, in fact, in practice, the mechanisms to enforce this are rarely used. They're normally limited personal implications for a governor who's a trustee who's not doing their job well, who's low performing. On the other hand, the CEO of a MAT is accountable to the DFE as well as the Board of Governors. It's the CEO's career and the head's career that are at stake, and it's important to look at that balance. In terms of the vision, the board and the trust school SLT must have a shared sense of vision and purpose, and leading the board in monitoring and implementing the strategy, setting the culture for the board, and balancing and valuing support and challenge responsibilities is key. The chair of governors should understand the processes of governance and have skill in governance application, but not the specialist expertise that comes from the clerk or governance professional, which is also an extremely important role, bridging the gap between executive and non-executive. In terms of leading and developing the board, the chair is responsible for the quality of his board. The board has the board needs to have the required skills and the knowledge and the commitment to govern. Succession planning is absolutely key, and the performance and since the performance and attendance of governors can be variable, and their volunteer status can cause friction in terms of enforcing their performance, it's important to focus on this. Appraisal is difficult, so it's absolutely critical to recruit the right governors in the first place and spend considerable time on the selection of governors, induction and training, and expectation setting at the early stages. A formal employment type appraisal process is very difficult to achieve with volunteers, but sometimes a one-to-one light touch conversation can touch on aspirations and whether mutual aspirations and whether they are being achieved by the governor. External evaluation, as David mentioned, is absolutely key, and regular, honest self-evaluation board is absolutely vital. Executive opinion should be included in this, and it's also worth reflecting on that the chair themselves can be evaluated by the vice chair. David, any thoughts?
Yeah, and actually, building on that, this is something we're grappling with a lot at Mulberry at the moment, and how we scale up and how you put in place a governance framework to properly understand the role of each local governing body within the context of the multi-academy trust. So, we're looking at the governance framework that we operate in. I think everyone will have something slightly different, but really understand the remit of your local governing body. So what decisions will be taken centrally, such as in our case, we would have a central finance committee that would be really scrutinising budgets and financial performance against then what is expected of a local governing body, where they may be more interested in curriculum and understanding what the offer is, student recruitment as well, and how exam results are going to be and all that type of stuff. As I say, the current focus at the moment is this idea of connectivity. Now, when I first joined the Mulberry Schools Trust, originally all of the local governing bodies were chaired by one of the trustees. However, as you end up taking on more schools, you start to run out of trustees, or you'd end up with a very unwieldy sized trust board. So we've been trying to establish a way of being able to manage that growth, recognising that we won't be able to carry on with that approach all the time. So we've come up with the idea of a cluster model, where you'll have a local governing body that will be responsible for multiple schools, probably 2 or 3, and then that local governing body within that would have to look to assign roles. You'll try still to have someone who is completely focused on one particular school, but they will then feed into a local governing body that oversees that cluster. It's something we also tried when I was at Mulberry Academy Shoreditch, and I think it went very successfully, is giving people a clear, dedicated role. So whether they need to focus on sixth form, whether they need to focus on being a community link, whether they need to focus on teaching and learning, whether they wanted to focus in our case on the house system, but actually giving someone a very clear responsibility helped to give them more purpose when it came to their school visits. And it's certainly something that, as I say, worked pretty well. Completely taking on board Arabella's points about sourcing governors. I mean, it is becoming increasingly challenging to find a number, and in many ways that's one of the reasons. Another reason behind the drive to a cluster model is actually being able to find the number of governors to get involved, and then thinking about how that works. So at Mulberry Academy Shoreditch, I would say we had a younger profile of local governing body, but that actually then meant it became very difficult managing some of the work commitments and so. And so trying to identify the right time for the meetings and the approach to meetings as well. I think particularly post-COVID, where you've now got hybrid meetings, but actually you still want to have the meetings in the school. How can that work when you've got people who are travelling on business and they can still stay involved? So these are challenges that I think a lot of schools are trying to face into at the moment. I'm not saying we've got the right answers, but we're very much about what can we do to keep increasing connectivity between local governing body and the trust.
Yeah, really interesting. Well, we're tackling very similar issues. The cluster model sounds like a really interesting thing to pursue on that. One of the things that we have tried doing is bringing together all our chairs of LGBs into an additional group so that they can communicate between themselves. But that has issues associated with it as well. And we've been through exactly the same process of having all our chairs of LGBs on the trust board and finding that was no longer viable. So really interesting to know that other people are going through the same issues.
We are, and I've definitely, we have looked to meet as chairs of local governing bodies together. And I think they're really important meetings. I think it's a really, it's similar to that peer-to-peer type analysis and understanding what works and what doesn't work. But we certainly use them as an opportunity to identify what are the key issues across the schools. We look to share experiences, and I suppose it's also about making sure that you have consistency in delivering the sort of central trust values, whilst recognising that every individual school will have its own culture. You can still have a collection of trust-wide values, and it's making sure that you're applying those consistently.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you, one of the challenges that we're dealing with is the desire to have younger, more diverse, more locally younger governors who actually live locally and are more connected with the community and the schools, but the fact they have very little time available, and wrestling with that is also a challenge. So glad to find other people have the same problems. Good. Moving on, relationships, the thing that we were emphasising at the beginning of this. I'm going to look at culture, I'm going to look at context, and I'm going to look at communication. So in terms of culture, I'd like to emphasise mutual trust and respect between the CEO and the chair. The CEO must recognise, appreciate, and be curious about the chair's external non-education experience. But equally, the chair must respect the seniority and the sector expertise of the CEO or head and be curious about how schools operate. And the chair should never forget that the CEO is a chief executive, not a subordinate. Building and maintaining strong relationships requires, as David said at the beginning of the presentation, requires both to adapt to each other's character. No two relationships will be the same. The board is responsible for appraisal and pay awards of the CEO head, but objectives should definitely be set collaboratively. Important to have clarity of roles. The CEO, the chair, and different members of the governing body should be completely clear on their relative responsibilities and how they interface. And it's really important to get the balance between critical and friend, support and challenge right. Challenge for challenge's sake is a very negative experience. The very worst types of governors challenge to show that they're awake or that they've read the papers. It's only useful to challenge if the culture and credibility of the challenger are established. Good school leaders really value the challenge they get from informed governors, but they also like a listening ear and actual praise. One of the things that one of our heads said to me was, I really like it when they find time to give you a pat on the back, especially in fast evolving times. Praise is also important. David.
Yeah, no, I mean, culture, I think, is very, very important. And I suppose this, in many ways, comes back to one of the earlier experiences I had at Mulberry Academy Shoreditch before we joined the Mulberry Schools Trust. So, and it's fair to say the culture wasn't particularly good. The relationship between the chair of governors and the head teacher wasn't what you would expect, and certainly not what we're hearing with some of the recommendations and what Arabella's been flagging as well. I think there were lots of red flags. I think the chair at the time probably, you could say, was not independent and had been in role for too long to be able to provide sufficient challenge to that head. And then there were some red flags that we picked up on in the board meeting where it was inconsistent reporting. The head was not particularly receptive to challenge, with it being his way or the highway. And then at that time, we had just set up a trust board, but there was no interaction between the local governing body at the time and the trust board, and it was very much being managed by the CEO, head teacher at that time. Well, it's clear to say that things didn't work out, and the situation evolved, and also we then moved on to join Mulberry. And coming back to something Arabella said right at the start, actually getting that appointment right is one of the most important jobs you can have. And when we appointed Ruth Holden at the time, she came in like a whirlwind and just absolutely made a massive difference to the school and the culture. And there were some things that we hadn't really even picked up on. And I think sometimes when you first join a local governing body, unless you've been in lots of other schools, you don't know what good looks like sometimes. And you're almost just accepting this as the environment. But actually, she changed two things very quickly. One was to remove walkie-talkies from teachers and members of staff who would wander around with them. Another one was to remove the lineups in the yard, as we call them, because in both cases it just kind of became a distraction and almost, I'm not going to call it prison, but actually it created that type of environment. And yet the minute you removed that, it suddenly felt like a much happier school-like place, and being able to sort of see the difference was quite stark. So we were really delighted with that appointment. It was incredibly successful, and we always like to tell her she's doing a fantastic job. And so I think also then, just to build on that, something again, Arabella, you said, is that they like to be probed and they like to be challenged, and the head would set up training sessions with the governors to try and sort of give them understand these are the sort of questions I'd be expecting you to be asking. These are the sort of areas that you should be exploring. And I think for new governors in particular, that is incredibly helpful, because actually when you first become a governor, apart from these webinars, of course, you don't actually have a lot of guidance as to what the role is and what you're supposed to be doing. So having those training sessions was particularly important. And again, I think I'd just come back to the level of involvement that you would have in terms of seeing that culture can change again when you've got an experienced head who's been in role against someone who's new in role. How do you help them to sort of maintain some of the good work that's been taking place? And again, that's where the chair if anything, that's where the chair of the governing body becomes the consistency point for a short while whilst that transition's taking place.
Yes, absolutely. So, context. And again, some quotes from some of our heads. School communities are based on love, not business. Schools are about people. Business is people. This image here shows is a picture of our recent event where we launched our Habs Aspire mentoring project, bringing together property consultants, in this case, members of the property sector, and young people who want to work in property. And I brought it up. I chose this picture for this particular slide because it shows the mixed community of teachers, leaders, governors, members of the haberdashers community that are all part of our haberdashers community. But I think it's a critical point to talk about that context. Governors really need to understand the context in which their school is working, and they will only establish their personal credibility, especially the chair of governors, by being known and trusted by the school community. Useful challenge and support can only come from a position of strong contextual understanding. So their visible presence is really important. They need to form their own opinion on strengths and weaknesses and the direction of travel, and find a way to sense check what they're hearing in meetings against what they see in the school so that they can ask the right questions. It's worth reflecting on the fact that to business professionals, a school can appear a chaotic environment. It's much less planned and predictable than a corporate organisation. And this can manifest as points of conflict. For example, governors find it quite hard to understand why the teaching profession in general is not particularly good at performance management. Governors need to take a lot of time to learn to understand a very different collegiate atmosphere. And they can do that and show the signs of having done that by learning the right language. There's a different language to schools, and vocabulary is important. And the only way you can learn this is by spending a significant amount of time in a school. They need to understand the operational factors. How does the school or the trust actually function? That might mean understanding the budget, it might mean HR, it might mean term dates, the school day, timetable, the journey to school. And the school needs to support this with a really strong training programme. And community. The governors really need to understand the community context of the school. What kind of families do the children come from? How do they live? What are the students going home to? And what implications does this have for the school and for parental engagement? This is the way that governors, particularly LGB governors, can actually establish their credibility. There'll be a lot of time wasted in pointless debate at board meetings if this contextual knowledge isn't in place.
Can I just come in on that? I mean, that quote is completely resonates, and it's one of the things that we were told when you look at your first or just any local governing body meeting pack. You see a lot of data, and it's important to remember that the numbers are students, real people, not just not business data that you might think about. And equally, it's also about expectations. So we spend a lot of time talking about where the school adds value, not necessarily overall performance. It's very unlikely that you'll get exam grades going up every year on year. Actually, every cohort of students, every year group is going to be different. But it's about making sure that you deliver the value to those students and help them to maximise their potential. They may not be able to achieve the same results as previous years, but they can at least achieve their potential.
Absolutely, completely agree. And then the last slide, back to communication. And I'm going to focus here on values and behaviours. That's the most important. Values should be discussed, agreed, and constantly referenced in any productive and happy organisation. And it's vital underpinning to an effective partnership between the executive and the non-executive. The why should be constantly clear as the what and the how are discussed, the way to constructive alignment. Behaviours are also extremely important, constantly referenced throughout the recruitment process for governors, often as an actually articulated code of conduct, which emphasises professionalism, respect, consistency of ideas and actions, admitting when you're wrong, recognition of executive expertise, and frank and honest dialogue. So communication should be regular and consistent. I would expect the chair of governors to be talking at least every 2 weeks with the head or the CEO, so that they can ensure really open dialogue and then address mutual concerns really quickly. The chair should focus on asking questions rather than giving directives. Their role is to guide, not to dictate. They need to be flexible. In times of crisis or change, meetings and communication need to be much more frequent, and they need to be honest. Clear and open communication about progress or the lack of progress is critical to mutual trust. This is a critical contribution to the relationship by the CEO. And it should be triangulated. Keeping other governors involved in the communications channels is really important, so that it's not just a dialogue between CEO and chair. And to do this, we've reflected on this partially already. LGB and trust board channels must be well developed to keep visibility up. Meeting culture should be more like a forum than an exam. Time is often the issue in getting all compliance matters and strategy discussions effectively in front of governors. But it's the chair and the CEO's job to make sure that this happened. And often committees and working groups can offer a better and more informal atmosphere for this kind of dialogue than actually in the board. Governors should encourage executive challenge, but once a decision is made, the executive have a responsibility to accept it and execute it. Going back to the original point, mutual trust and respect are vital. David.
And I would just build on that by saying, to me, it's all about building that trusted relationship. And I think, in terms of contact times, I know Arabella, you sort of pointed to, being in touch every couple of weeks. I suppose when I think about it, I thought, oh, is that about right? It probably is about right on average, but there'll be periods where I may not have contact with the head for a number of weeks. So, as an experienced head, she doesn't, I trust her to be able to get on with things, but equally, when there are challenges that need to be addressed, we'll probably be on the phone daily or text messaging and all that type of stuff to really stay in contact. So it's being able to step up when really needed, and understanding when actually things are going along quite smoothly. But that's all part of just having that trusted relationship, and making sure that you are available when you need to be available. I think that's where I come to. But again, just to emphasise Arabella's point there, I think it's all about that mutual trust.
Absolutely. There, Anne, back to you. We've done our part.
Just unmuting myself, and I'm just thinking how I recognise every single thing that you've both been talking about, having been on a governing body, secondary school governing body for 15 years, and also a primary MAT trust board. What's been a delight is to listen to you exploring the principles, but pinning them down in terms of a practical way of behaving. And I think that's been, well, for me, it's been absolutely excellent. Thank you. And the other thing I wanted to pick up on what you said was that quote, that lovely quotation, Arabella, and David picked up on it too, about the role of a governor evolving from sherry and concerts to being a sort of strategic non-executive director, where effective use of skills are so important. And, I sort of just reflect on the fact that it is only since 2000 that this has been the case with the white paper, where it was specifically required to have skilled governors on governing body, and then that the greater accountability that now sits on governors' shoulders, both in the private sector and in the state sector, and particularly in state MATs and private schools, such as you both, David and Arabella, are managing, or well, helping to manage, helping to govern. So great. I think we have some time for questions. Not long, but we have time. I'm scanning the tiles, so do put your hand up if you would like to ask anything or endorse anything that's been said, or ask a question about what to do in the circumstance where something goes horribly wrong. Because one of the things that both David and Arabella emphasised was the amount of time spent, but that varies depending on how well your school is doing. If your school is bowling along safely and you're meeting targets and the relationships are working, then a governor's role is much less in terms of time and involvement. If things are going badly in any of those ways, then governors step up and the time then is exponential almost.
Well, I think at that point, Anne, and I was reflecting on the experience where we ended up with a serious leadership vacuum
Yes.
At the school, and several of us were effectively parked in the school or camped in the school for several days dealing with it, and to help provide at least some of that hands-on leadership.
Yeah.
Whilst we were arranging some interim arrangements at that point, and at that point it was pretty much a full-time role. Yeah,
I saw Lucy come off mute, and now there's a yellow hand. So come on, Lucy.
It was just a question for Arabella, actually. I was really interested in what you said about the fact that and I think it is going to be borne out that in the independent sector, the schools are the groups are going to get bigger. There's going to be a lot of mergers and acquisitions going on, and it's really about how you think that that's going to evolve in terms of governance, in terms of, I know in some bigger organizations you have the kind of trust board, and then you have the kind of local governing bodies, but that's not so common in the independent sector. And I just wondered if you had a view on what that might look like and how you make sure you get the balance of responsibilities right between the trustees and the local governing body.
Oh, well, I think increasing scale is a trend across both the independent and the state sectors. And as I was writing this presentation, I realised that actually I wasn't really distinguishing between the responsibilities of an independent school director fundamentally, and a trustee of a MAP board. I think it's both commercial and charitable schools are growing in the independent sector, are growing in size, and inevitably there's going to have to be a solution that mirrors the same structure as a trust, a MAP trust board, the LGBs. And where the legal responsibilities sits comes down to the charitable status, I would imagine. But this is coming. I mean, we talked about in earlier comment, we talked about when governors need to be more involved. Well, all schools and both across the independent and the state sector are going through a tough time financially at the moment. The independent sector is under huge pressure, as we see in the headlines constantly, and state sectors, a high proportion of MAPs are running to deficit budgets at the moment, which brings in the role of the business experienced chair of governor really to the fore. So it's a time when schools need their governing bodies really badly.
Oh, thank you for that. We've got a question on the chat, which I'll read out. How do we make our schools and colleges governing bodies more diverse so they're representative of the communities they serve, and how do we attract more younger governors?
I can give you something on this. Sorry, carry on.
Just before you answer that, I know from my work in founding governors for schools that both of those issues, Moya, are problems, and Governors for Schools is particularly focused on attempting to recruit into those two areas to make governing bodies more diverse and to recruit younger governors. So I really applaud your question. Sorry, Arabella, I cut in on you because you have an answer.
Well, I don't have an answer, but I have thoughts. It's an ambition for us, very strong ambition, and in fact, it goes across the Haberdashers' Company in general. We want a younger membership, more diverse membership, more linked to the local communities around our schools. One of the ways those people can find their way into the company is by governorship, but it is complicated because I think I mentioned it earlier when I was talking. The kind of people that we're talking about are less likely to have freedom over their work diaries or have family commitments than those who are older at the end of their careers, a lot of flexibility in their diaries, or even retired. So it's a real challenge finding ways to do that. And we've looked at different ways, making meetings remote, having them in the evening, trying different ways to make that work. And I haven't found the solution. But the one thing that does seem to be working, and it was referred to in the video right at the beginning, is we're very keen on building the lifelong community. You heard the CEO of our South London Trust talk about from 3 to forever. The nirvana that we're working towards, and we are many steps away from it, is alumni leaving the school, becoming a governor of the school, making their way into the Haberdashers' Company, perhaps being a mentor to pupils, existing pupils at the school, and building that lifelong virtuous circle where we knit into our communities, but also bring people into the company at the same time. So it's a long-term project, but that's the direction that we're moving in.
Yes, David, you're off mute. You perhaps have a view on this.
Yeah, no, I mean, at Marlborough, we have got a DEI strategy to improve diversity across our local governing bodies and our trust board. We've had this strategy in operation for 4 years, where we set ourselves some really clear targets. Now, I think we recognise you cannot change everything overnight, but actually what we've had to give really careful thought to is succession planning. So we've been bringing in individuals at local governing body level. We may be looking to appoint them as chair of local governing bodies. We may be looking to bring them into the trust board. But all of this is about us trying to think about long-term succession and ensuring that our governing bodies do represent the communities that we serve.
Yes. Mo, your hand is up. Would you like to come back on your question with a bit more?
Thank you for that, Arabella and David. I think when I became a governor, I think I was 19 or 20 at the time. I was relatively young, one of the youngest in my local authority, and sort of 22 years on, and I look around the governing bodies and I'm still one of the youngest, and that really doesn't pull down well. And one of the things I try and do, and I meant to my mentees when they talk about looking at public appointments, non-exec and trustee roles, one of the first things I promote is become a school governor. I said that the smallest primary school will have a budget of about £1 million, and regardless if the budget is £1 million or £500,000 or £1 billion in a health board, the committees, the structure, the conversations we will have will be pretty much similar in terms of engagement, and that experience you have and you'll learn as a school governor will help you progress into other senior positions over time. And I think, is it worth looking at how we advertise these positions? I know a lot of local authorities, they sort of promote governors, but a lot of people don't pick them up. So is it worth looking at something like public appointments campaigns, looking at other avenues of putting that information out there? Because the vast majority of the people that I speak to are unaware of where they need to go. And sometimes they don't know where public appointments are doing a little bit more work, non-execs, trustees, they do a little bit more work in terms of promoting this. Is it worth looking at the wider sort of recruitment process, so it goes out further, and not just within London, but I'm based in Wales, so looking at what it's like in Scotland, Northern Ireland, England and Wales. Thank you.
Can I just cover that?
David,
it's a very good question, very good point. And I think coming back to something Arabella said, sometimes you often find it's actually quite challenging from the time perspective. But actually, one of the things that we've done to try and address that is we have partnerships with a number of large organisations that allocates a certain amount of volunteering time to all employees. I think with I was at KPMG for a number of years. And if you became a governor of the school, you'd be allocated 8 days volunteering every year to devote to that role. So that was quite a good way of encouraging individuals at all levels, at all ages, to take part. And also, when you then tap into a company like that, that's where they've got offices dotted around. So you'd hope that you'd be able to find someone across the UK.
Yes. Yeah, I think KPMG are one of the companies that recognise the value in terms of professional development of being a governor, and actually embed that into their performance management review in the workplace. And in fact, it is astonishing that some of those large companies even pay governors for schools to recruit and place governors because it's free professional development training. So I think you're both onto something that is really very valuable. And in that way, younger people then can get something, well, get a whole range of things back from being a governor. They're giving something back, but they're developing professionally and learning to work in some ways quite a high-powered context. If it comes to chairing a committee, for example. Does that ring true to you, Arabella, at all?
Yes, absolutely. And I think it's also important to think about how you communicate about what governors are. So that video that I played you was quite deliberately, the people we put in it quite deliberately chosen to explode a few myths about who you had to be a chair of governors. Yes. You can't, like the CEO of South London Trust is very fond of saying, you can't be what you can't see. And that's something we consciously look at the role models that we put in front of young people and prospective governors with that in mind, so that people feel that there is a place for them. I think that's important as well. Get away from the sherry and concerts.
Mm-hmm. So we love that question. It is 7:05. It is our time finished. So I think one of the speakers earlier on said about starting on time and finishing on time. And so we better not go more than 5 minutes over. Thank you, David and Arabella, so very much for all that expertise. Clearly, it did mine a couple of really valuable questions and points. So I think now is the time for us to stop, and I'm going to hand back to Sheila, who is doing the magic on the IT front, I think. Hello, Sheila.